Donald Trump will do whatever it takes to keep the truth from coming out, and that is exactly what he proved this morning, as the DOJ is now moving to charge Don Lemon for exercising his First Amendment rights. Now, we covered this last night, that Don Lemon was at a church in Minneapolis where the preacher works as a field director for ICE, and so his church was flooded with protesters on Sunday, and Don Lemon was simply there covering it, and now the DOJ is moving to charge him, and it is instantly backfiring as independent media fights back. We're going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, the DOJ is trying to make wild allegations that Don Lemon was in charge of a protest, shutting down a church, that he was the mastermind behind all of it. So I want to start with the context of what actually happened at this church, a clip from those covering it, not just Don, but other reporters, because it's important legally to protect him in this instance.
David Easterwood is a pastor here. He is also the director of the field office for ICE in St. Paul. So someone who claims to worship God, teaching people in this church about God, is out there overseeing ICE agents. Think about what we've experienced. The murder of Renee Good at the hands of ICE. A Venezuelan national shot by ICE. A 6-month-old baby who almost died as a result of ICE unleashing military-grade weapons on our community. How dare you claim to be a pastor of God and you are involved in evil in our community?
Reporters doing their jobs and protesters calling out a pastor who is not living the truth that he lies through his teeth about every single day. We talked about this last night. The cosplay Christians are a plague on our society. These people who use God as a buffer between them and accountability, who say that they work in Jesus' name. It's always these people with Bible verses in their bios who are saying the worst things. But do you know what they never say? They never say a single quote from Christ himself. They don't say that you should take in a foreigner as your neighbor. They don't say that you should give away your riches and that the wealthy do not make it into heaven because they hoard. No, they never say that. Or they just use this as a crutch, as an excuse to do whatever they want. And that is what Don Lemon was simply asking this pastor about. This clip shows it all.
This is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
But there were folks who will say,
I have to take care of my flock.
okay, but listen, we live in there's a constitution, the First Amendment, to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
Yeah. We're here to worship. We're here to worship Jesus, because that's the hope of these cities. That's the hope of the world, is Jesus Christ.
I want to be very respectful. Please don't push me though.
We're here to worship Jesus. Yes. That's why we're here.
Yes.
Okay, that's why we're here. Okay. That's what we're about.
Do you think Jesus would be understanding
we're about
and love these folks?
We're about spreading the love of Jesus.
But did you try to talk to them as a
No
Christian?
one is willing to talk.
Okay.
I have to take care of my church and my family, so I ask that you actually would also leave this building.
You don't want us to
Unless you're here to
chronicle what
worship.
happened?
Unless you're here to worship.
I'm always worship. I'm a Christian.
We're here to worship.
Yeah.
We're here to worship. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You know how MAGA always falls back on the just asking questions mantra when they want to get away with doing something bigoted or racist or homophobic, whatever it might be, or suggesting some wild conspiracy? Don was quite literally just asking questions. He was covering the protest. He was asking the pastor very respectfully what he thought of what was happening in his church. He didn't start some riot. Everyone has the right to free expression. It is insane that anyone would take away anything besides the fact that Don was being respectful in doing journalism on the ground in Minneapolis. And now the DOJ, trying to scare us all, is moving to shut him down. Trump DOJ goon hypes up bonkers Don Lemon probe. MAGA has decided Don Lemon is no longer a journalist, but a criminal suspect. The former CNN anchor found himself in the crosshairs of GOP officials this week after covering a Minneapolis Sunday church protest tied to outrage over immigration enforcement. Lemon was live streaming as protesters entered a city's church service in Minneapolis to confront a pastor they accused of working with immigration and customs enforcement. The city has become a flashpoint following the fatal murder of 37-year-old Renee Good by an ICE agent earlier this month, fueling a wave of protests and increased ICE presence. Lemon's on-the-ground reporting has been framed by Trump's Justice Department lackeys as a potential federal crime, prompting threats of jail time in an escalating investigation. Assistant Attorney General Hamid Dillon zeroed in on Lemon, accusing him on Twitter of participating in, not merely covering the protest. The First Amendment doesn't protect your pseudo-journalism of disrupting a prayer service, she wrote, ending with a blunt warning, you are on notice. Dillon doubled down late Sunday, announcing that her office was coordinating with Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate whether the protest violated the federal FACE Act, which prohibits interference with religious worship. Continuing her rant, she accused demonstrators of desecrating a house of worship and tagged Bondi directly. Lemon responded in a video posted Sunday night, flatly denying involvement in organizing the protest. I have no affiliations with that organization, he said, insisting he did not have prior knowledge of the protesters' plan to enter the church. He described his actions as chronicling events, an act of journalism, and said his reporting was protected by the First Amendment. The explanation did little to slow Dillon's momentum. Appearing on Newsmax the following morning, she escalated the rhetoric, claiming that 2 federal prosecutors from her office were already en route to Minneapolis and that an FBI team had been assembled. She described the church incident as a heinous act, receiving the highest level of attention from the Justice Department. Dillon later suggested that the potential legal exposure could go well beyond misdemeanor charges under the FACE Act. In an appearance on the MAGA mouthpiece Benny Johnson show, she floated the possibility of felony prosecution under the Ku Klux Klan Act, arguing that the law could apply if authorities determined there was a conspiracy to intimidate worshipers or violate civil rights. Journalism is not a badge or a shield, Dillon said, dismissing Lemon's claims of press protection. She mocked his career trajectory, adding, he was a journalist, I don't know what he is now, and argued that video footage showed Lemon was embedded with protesters and clearly knew what was going to happen. The Daily Beast has reached out to the Department of Justice, the White House, and Lemon for comment. Attorney General Pam Bondi echoed the hardline warning on Twitter that attacks against law enforcement and the intimidation of Christians are being met with the full force of federal law. The White House also weighed in with Carolyn Levitt, condemning what she called the harassment of Christians in their sacred place of worship and insisting President Trump will not tolerate such actions. Even outside political circles, Lemon has come under fire. Nicki Minaj, has increasingly aligned herself with MAGA rhetoric, joined the pile-on, blasting Lemon on Twitter, demanding he be jailed. Let me make one thing very clear. The only harassment of Christians that is happening because of ICE is not protests in response to ICE. It is ICE agents going into churches and ripping people, children, families out of services. It has been condemned by the Pope that immigration officials are going in, thugs, we're not going to call them officials, these thugs are going into places of worship to rip people from their families. Rip them out of pews mid-prayer. Don Lemon going in with his camera crew, and y'all know I've been on Don Lemon's show a lot of times, so hopefully I'm not biased in saying this. They're great guys, they do good journalism, they want to be on the ground. Don Lemon was staying up till like 5 a.m. on New Year's Eve because he wanted to talk to people in New Orleans. That is what he does. He goes on the street, he goes to Congress. Like Don is just everywhere shooting live and talking to people. He is simply just talking to people. But Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and Carolyn Levitt want to scare us. They want to scare independent media, especially because they know that we do not have the legal protections, all the lawyers, all the money behind us that the corporate media does, and the corporate media is already controlled by corporate interests. And so they think that they can intimidate us with lawsuits of threats of jail time, and that'll just shut us up. But that is not the case. That is not what's going to happen. But it is just so clear how just like ridiculous these people's lies are, that Christians are being persecuted by Don Lemon. He finished the clip by saying, well, I'm a Christian. That's why I want to know. I go to Sunday service. I want to know. In what way was he simply asking questions of a pastor who works for ICE? Right? So I don't know what he's doing to protect his flock, protect his community when you're working for ICE. The man was asking questions. He was reporting. Don didn't organize this. Even if he had organized what? A protest? No one was hurt. It's not like they killed a woman in her car, because that's what ICE does. It's not what Don Lemon does. This is absurd, and it is clear intimidation. Donald Trump is saying that he is going to jail Don Lemon because he wants the rest of us scared, and that is what they have been doing through this entire administration, and that is why shame on the mainstream media for refusing to act like this is what's happening, to lob softballs at Donald Trump, to refuse to take real stands, to not stand up for your colleagues when he calls them stupid, idiots, criminals, liars. This is the place that we get to if you do not defend the act of doing journalism. And it is happening all over the place. Something that has gone quite unreported is how Donald Trump is also intimidating the Washington Post, as of course Jeff Bezos does nothing. Ari Melber broke it down in a clip that I played a time or two, but we just need to hear it again. And if you haven't, listen up.
Times reports that it's exceedingly rare to search a reporter's home, and it refers to a 1980 law that bans searching reporters unless they are the suspect they are the suspect in a criminal probe. Obviously, for example, being a journalist doesn't mean that the authorities can never deal with you if they have something separate from your journalism that you did wrong. Washington Post executive editor says this extraordinary aggressive action is deeply concerning and raises profound questions and concern around the constitutional protections for our work. Some of this was also telegraphed because the administration, in contrast to past administrations in both parties, had recently diluted the rules that protect journalists. So we knew they were already going down this road because there was some level of intent. If this is a valid factual pursuit, if ultimately they overturn and find materials that supports the investigation, everyone will look at that and report that out. But it comes at a time when the administration is going after all kinds of public opponents. It's going after the Federal Reserve Chair. It's using criminal probes to intimidate. And so there are obviously real questions about whether this pursuit, kind of breaking a line we haven't seen yet in the second term, of a mainstream major journalist's home and their property and their materials, whether that itself is an exception that's lawful or part of a larger selective prosecution campaign.
They will do whatever they possibly can to scare us. So we cannot bend or fold. We have to stand stronger. We are going to on this show. If you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video. If you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. Keep on fighting, y'all. Don't let them silence you. And until next time, I'll see you soon.